Good evening, good evening, good evening. Yeah, it's Chagai. Okay, we're going live on Facebook and we are live on YouTube. We're going to go live. We're going to go live on the other platforms.
Erev Tov.
Erev Tov. Everyone should please mute themselves. We're going to go live in a moment here. Good evening, Elliot. Good evening, Chagai and Margot. Give me a second here. We're going to share this on two other platforms. We are live on Facebook, live on YouTube. We're going to be on live. We're live on Zoom. We're going to be two more lives. So many lives. And we'll be ready to roll. Good evening, Kayla Gittel. Oh, James is coming in. Very good. Oh, Mitchell's coming. Give a cook. L'chaim Kayla Gittel. What a crowd gathering. That's it. We're in the mode, baby. 24 hours, less than 24 hours, and we're going to be Gesetz, the middle of Hanukkah. Very good. Okay. We have shared it on all our platforms, and we are good to go. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. We are in the Parsha of Vayeshev. What makes this Parsha special, Baruch? The Parsha that I read for my Bar Mitzvah. Very good. That's the one I read. And so we were reading about Joseph, but Yosef HaTzadik, the 11th of the 12 tribes, only second to the last with his brother Binyamin. Someone needs to, Mitchell, there we go. You got to mute yourself, people. And he's sold by his brothers after they wanted to kill him, and they put him in a pit because Reuven intervened. And then Judah said, let's sell them. What's the point of killing him? Let's sell him. And he ends up being sold to a fellow in Egypt named Potiphar, a member of the Pharaoh government, a member of the Pharaoh regime. And everything's going really well in the house of Pharaoh. In the house of Potiphar, until Potiphar's wife has a crush on Joseph. She would like to be in a relationship with Joseph. He's not interested. I shouldn't say that. He was fairly susceptible to being seduced. But at the last moment, the visage of his father, Jacob, comes into his mind, and he says, "Oi, I'm a son of Jacob. My father educated me better than this," and he refrains. And because he refrains, she accuses him of rape, and he ends up in an Egyptian prison. And even though his master Potiphar really liked him, he didn't want to mess with his wife. So even though he was pretty sure that was not the case, it was easier to blame Joseph than blame his wife for being a liar. And so he gets him put into a dungeon, and he spends many, many years in this prison. And eventually that's where he meets the butler and baker. And the butler and baker eventually, after a year in prison, get out, and they tell Pharaoh there's a guy with a good interpretation. The whole parsha. But what it says, and today we're gonna. I know, John, you waiting for which page? It's going to be on page 245, and on 245, where it says verse 5. So verse 5 says, what happened was that from the time that he appointed Joseph over his house and over everything he had, God blessed the house of the Egyptian because of Joseph. God's blessing was found in everything he had, in the house and in the field. And then it says he left everything he had in Joseph's hands, and he didn't care to know but anything of his except the crumpet that he ate. Since Joseph was in control, he pampered himself so that Joseph had handsome features and a beautiful complexion. And in the parentheses, you'll see what Rashi says from the Medrash, that God said, you're pampering yourself while your father mourns, I will incite Potiphar's wife against you. So God was not happy with one slight issue. Joseph was an incredible man. But you know how it is with righteous people. With righteous people, God is very careful with them. Chavi and I always talk about that. How if someone eats in Burger King, God forbid, every day, a non-Jew, obviously, eats in Burger King every day, their body becomes immune to healthy food. Or I should say immune to unhealthy food. So they can eat garbage and they're not affected. But let's say they quit after 20 years of eating a Burger King. Now they spend a year cleansing themselves with green juices and with chiropractors and with essential oils and plant-based and organic and non-GMO and save the world, save the elephants, all of it. It's the most healthy for a year. And after a year of eating such beautiful, healthy, you're treating your body like the temple that it is. After a year, you go and eat some sloppy, disgusting Burger King sandwich. You'll have stomach aches and headaches, and the sodium and the MSG, it'll kill you. So when you were eating it for 20 years, it didn't bother you because your body was immune. But when you trained your body to be more sensitive to eating healthy, your body has more expectations of you that you're not going to put garbage. So yes, you can end up suffering more because you chose to live healthfully, which results in your body being less immune to eating garbage. It's a fact. This is a natural fact of the human body. Spiritually, it's no different. Because you're a tzaddik, because you're a righteous person like Joseph, and you're living so righteously, God expects you to keep it up. It's not like, oh, you're righteous, so we'll give you a dispensation. You could put your hair, you could make your hair in front of the mirror, right? It says that Joseph was handsome, features, and a beautiful complexion. And he had time, he was busy, he was making himself look beautiful. Yeah, faputzing, it's a Yiddish word, he's making himself look all attractive. And God says, your father sitting in Israel crying because he thinks you're dead. He's mourning the loss of his beloved Joseph. And you're sitting here, faputzing. But the point is that there's a double language here in the verse, and that's what I want to get to. It says, in Hebrew, it says, Yefei Toar v'Yefei Mara. Beautiful, handsome features, beautiful features, and beautiful complexion. The Torah couldn't tell us he just took care of his beauty. That he had to give us every detail of every complexion and features. I understand that it's two separate things, but there has to be a bigger reason here. The Torah is trying to tell us just that Joseph took care of his body or that he was very into his looks. You could say that. The double language demands a deeper explanation, especially when you're talking about someone like Yosef HaTzadik, someone like Joseph. So what I share with you tonight, the part that I'm going to share with you about Parshas Vayeh, about the Parsha, about Joseph, is from a talk that the Rebbe gave in 1957. Actually gave it, 1957. And the part that I'm going to connect to Hanukkah is from a talk that the Rebbe gave in 1953. On Hanukkah of 1953. So both from the 50s. And what the Rebbe says is as follows. There's two very powerful aspects of the episode of Joseph and his beauty and the seduction of Potiphar's wife when she tried to seduce Joseph and ended up in prison. And there's two sides to it, really, and they really, on some level, interconnect. Let's take Joseph first. Let's take Joseph first. If you look at these two things, right, on a very simplistic level, he was a guy that was into his looks. But really, like everything else in Judaism, there's the exoteric and the esoteric. And on the esoteric level, on a deeper mystical level, there's something much bigger going on here. It's not just that Joseph was a good-looking kid that, I think they call it in English a metrosexual. He wants to make a male that loves making himself look all beautiful. It's Changeputs with the, what do they call those? With the nail filers and the straight jeans, that they call the flat jeans, the skinny jeans. That's not. We're talking about Yosef HaTzadik. We're talking about Joseph. The same Joseph that survived 22 years in Egypt away from his family. The one that survived as a Hebrew-speaking Jew and raised his two children, Ephraim and Manasseh, in Egypt as Jews with circumcisions, etc. We're not talking about a yo-yo. We're not talking about some nobody. We're talking about Joseph. So there has to be more than just the physical features and complexions that we're referring to. So Chassidus explains that if you look back 2 weeks ago in Parshas Vayetze, when the tribes were born, when Joseph was born, his mother said, Yosef Hashem li ben acher, God will add for me another son. In other words, when she named Joseph, she already included in her prayer that God will eventually, hopefully, give her another son. What Chassidus explains is that in his name, you can find the features of who he is as a person. And that's in general. In Judaism, a name many times, especially if parents were focused when they gave their child their Hebrew name, you can see the mission, the focus, the connection between a person's name and their life's mission. Joseph's life was about Yosef li Hashem ben Acher, which means give me another, right? That's what she was referring to. But what it means spiritually is that Joseph's life's mission was to take the Acher, to take the other, which means anyone in the Jewish community that's outside of the community, so to say, they fell through the cracks, and make them into a ben, make sure they feel like they're a son of the Jewish people. Yosef, to add to the Jewish people by taking an acher, someone who feels like an outsider that fell through the cracks, and making them into a ben, making them into a son. In other words, Joseph's entire life's mission was, how do I get more people to become connected to Hashem? He represented the idea, the movement of Bali Tshuva, people that are not necessarily on the path of God, even though they're Jewish, and they return home to their Jewish faith. Now, because of this unique power that Joseph had, the ability to know, because it's a unique skill, to know how to deal with someone that had fallen through the cracks, that might not even want to talk to you because you're in the system and he's out of the system, right? I think they call it in America today, anyone that falls through the disenfranchised. So Joseph was very good at getting the people who felt disenfranchised to make them feel like they're part of the Jewish community again. But because of that unique skill, because of that unique modus operandi that he had, he was able to do it well, because what he had that others didn't was he had beautiful complexion and beautiful features. The double language that we just read in the verse. What does the features and the complexion represent spiritually? It represents a success in fulfillment of the positive commandments of the Torah, mitzvahs aseh, the things that God asks us to do. There's 248 positive commandments. Please eat matzah on Passover. Please put on tefillin in the morning. Please fast on Yom Kippur. Please fill in the blank. And then there's the 365 prohibitions, which he was also very good at, refraining from transgressing the 365 prohibitions of the Torah. So when it says features, it refers to the positive commandments. When it says complexion, it refers to the negative prohibitions. And he was so good, right? He was so good at bringing those values to people that had fallen through the cracks and bringing them back on board. So suddenly, a guy who we thought is, very into his looks and his bodily image, there's a much deeper statement here that the Torah is telling us about Joseph. But it's more than that. What the Torah is telling us, says the Rebbe, is really powerful, because back in the 40s and 30s, the previous Chabad Rebbe once said, right, especially when he was dealing a lot with the Enlightenment movement, the Reform movement, he said, they say, oh my gosh, we're losing Jews to assimilation, to intermarriage, to secularism, to Zionism, to whatever ism was out there back then, the seculars, I'm talking about secular Zionism or Yiddishisten and Bundisten and Communisten and Yevsektia, what kind of movements were going on in Eastern and Western Europe? It was crazy. So he said, sometimes people run, they want to put out the fire. And they go, oh my gosh, there's a fire. You have to put out the fire. It doesn't matter what, there's liquid in this big jug there's liquid in here. Let's throw the liquid. It's like, hold on, take a pause. The liquid, look at the bottle. It says it's kerosene, right? You're going to pour it on the fire. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to solve your problem. It's going to make things a lot worse. So sometimes in the name of outreach, in the name of saving a society from a problem, we end up creating a much bigger problem. Look, for example, I'm allowed to say this because I'm a free thinker, right? Look how much racism we have in our country today. While we spent the last 150 years trying to get rid of racism, and I don't think we've ever had an era where it was so much racism. Some of the people who claim to be fighting racism are creating more and more racism. I'm allowed to say this too. Some of the people that have spent the last 50 years fighting anti-Semitism, they do a pretty good job of creating some of that too. But my point is, not everyone that tries to solve a problem knows how to solve it. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to be a proper representation of the fix in order to fix the problem that you're trying to fix. But if you're part of the problem, you ain't going to fix it. Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, was a very unique soul because his own spiritual well-being was very balanced. He had an anchored spiritual well-being that was both associated with the positive commandments of Judaism and the negative prohibitions. And he understood the famous Talmudic foundation of the Tractate of Bava Metzia. The Gemara says in Bava Metzia, the Talmud says in the Tractate of Bava Metzia that first you got to beautify yourself, and afterwards you can beautify others. Right? You come into a room and you want to, it smells terrible in here. I want to fix the smell. You start spraying, room refreshing, whatever, bathroom spray, until you figure out, Chacham, you're the one that smells. It doesn't matter how much you're going to spray until you clean up whatever's making it stink. It ain't gonna solve the problem. People come in, I want to solve. Yiddishkeit, Judaism is falling apart. I'm coming to the rescue. But what are you coming to the rescue with? With gasoline? It ain't going to put the fire out. Yosef HaTzadik was Yefei Toyar, Vifei Mara. He was both beautiful in his features and beautiful in his complexion. He was a balanced, anchored individual, both when it came to all aspects of Judaism. And therefore, when he went out to try to help someone come closer to God, when he went out to try to fulfill his life's mission, whether it was with his own children, his own sons, Menashe and Ephraim, whether it was with his wife Asnas, the bottom line is that he was able to do so in a very healthy way because he understood another key aspect to outreach. And that is, if you're talking to someone, trying to uplift them into a certain matter, right? Let's say you try to convince someone that it's important to pray. And then they watch you pray. And they can tell in 5 seconds that you're not really interested in prayer. And not only you're not interested, you're not even trying to get better at it. It's going to be very hard to uplift someone or educate someone or inspire someone to pray when they can see right through you and they know that not only are you struggling, if you're struggling, that's okay. But if you're struggling and trying to fix yourself, that's okay. But if you're just struggling without any endeavor to try to get better and they can see right through it, they're not interested, right? I've said this 1,000,000 times. If the guys who are screaming at me about climate change, I'm sitting being inspected in the most intimate places of my body by some TSA agent because I need to fly somewhere with 3 stopovers, right? And the guy's screaming at me that I need to save the planet is flying on a private jet. It's very hard to convince me that you mean one word you're saying, right? We had a doctor growing up in Crown Heights. I'll keep it. I won't say his name. He's in heaven, so may he rest in peace. He was a very dear friend of our families, but he was overweight, and he would sit in the bagel store on Kingston Avenue eating bagels, big tuna bagels. And I'll never forget, he told my older brother once, hey, you got to lose weight or it's going to be very low. My brother looked at him and said, look who's talking. Right? That my brother, being a New Yorker, said, look who's talking. It's very hard to convince someone, right? You know the story with the rabbi, and the story with the rabbi who always talked about how much we have to welcome children, and children are so important in the synagogue, and what would we do without the children? And one day they put new concrete, new cement outside the shul building, and before it dried, the kids came running and they ran through it and they created footprints. And he started screaming like a maniac at the kids. So everyone said to him, hold on, you always said you loved the kids. He says, yeah, I love the kids in the abstract, not in the concrete, right? And so the reality is that in theory, it's very good. Yeah, we want to save the Jewish world. With what? What are you saving the Jewish world with? You could either save the Jewish world like Yosef HaTzadik did, come as a balanced, anchored Jew on a journey, trying to be a better version of yourself, and share that same vigor and that same enthusiasm with those that you are talking to. And then they will have an appreciation that you are a person that lives with integrity. And therefore, even though you're not perfect, because there is no such thing as perfect, but you live with integrity, there's somebody to talk to. But without that, nothing to talk about. But that brings us really to the second part of the story, which is that it says Rashi quotes it, that's from the Medrash, that Potiphar's wife, who was trying to seduce Joseph, it says, L'shem Shemayim Niskavna, she had in mind to do it for the sake of heaven. Why? Because she had a vision that there will be descendants of Joseph that will come from her family, so she assumed she was meant to be the spouse. Very good. But in the truth is, Joseph married her daughter Asnas, and that was her mistake. She mixed it up. She thought it was her, but really it was for her daughter. But here we see something interesting, and that you could see something that on the external factor, the external level, it's the opposite of holiness. But if you look deep down, it could be a very holy intention that ends up being misunderstood and channeled, misguided in a way that is very unholy. But the intentions could come from a place of holiness. And the Alter Rebbe, by the way, in his magnum opus, in his Tanya, in Igeres HaKodesh, says, I think it's Epistle 25, he says that when a Jew is praying, in the middle of prayer, a Gentile, an idolater comes and stands in front of you while you're praying, and he's making you crazy. He's disturbing you. Right? So you say to yourself, oh my gosh, I got to get rid of this obstacle, this idolater standing here and disturbing my prayers. He says, no, that's not what the Alter Rebbe says. Alter Rebbe says that what it should do is it should inspire you to pray even with more focus and more meditation. In other words, you have to now ignore the guy that's disturbing you. And in other words, instead of looking at that individual as, oh my gosh, this big, terrible idolater is standing in front of me and disturbing my prayer. No, look at that. He's making me pray better. So on the external factor, if you look at it from an external, oh my gosh, there's this big unholy feature right in front of me disturbing my prayer. But if you look a little deeper, you realize that the Gentile being there, the idolater being there, is meant to uplift your prayer, right? Why did God have to put an idolater there? He couldn't just let you pray shashtil without any obstacles, without any challenges. Well, why does that have to be an idolater disturbing? But God wanted your prayers to be with more vigor and with more excitement and with more kavanah, more focus and with more understanding of the words you're saying. So what did he do? He put externally an idolater standing in front of you, but internally the idolater wants to be part of your prayer. He too, he doesn't necessarily know it, but subconsciously he wants to be part of the elevation of the world to a more godly place. Can't do it on his own, so he stands in front of you to make sure that your prayers should be even more incredible. And thus, instead of looking at the idolater and saying, oh my gosh, what a pain in the you-know-what, no, you're disturbing me. I'm going to daven even better. I don't know if you know this. If you have kids, you might relate. You're in the middle of davening the Amidah, and somehow it's a custom by children, without even knowing subconsciously, all their needs that they have come to fruition primarily between Shema and the Amidah, the two most important parts of the prayer. Suddenly Zizi is lined up, and Many's right behind her, and the Chanalei, I need you, Abba, Abba, Abba. You try to daven with the Abba, Abba in your head. You have no choice. In the Amidah, the Shema, at least I can look at her. The Amidah, I have to be totally focused. The Amidah. So now they think you're ignoring you. So what do kids do when you ignore them? Now they push you and say Abba at the same time. So now you're being rocked while you're trying to do Moedim, and you try, there's boom, Abba, Abba. They're beschreit. What do you think? You think that you think Hashem orchestrated that just so you could get annoyed? That would be a very superficial way of looking at it. A more deep way of looking at it, a more centered way of looking at it, a more focused way of looking at it is that it was put there so that you can daven better. You know, there's a famous teaching of the Mazritcher Maggid, the student of the Baal Shem Tov, of Dov Berg. He said, if you look at 2 weeks ago in the Parsha, that whole end of Parshas Vayetze, where it talks about Laban chasing Jacob and his family until he catches up with them and he starts demanding his idols back, etc., right? So the Mazritcher Maggid asks, what do we need to have all that information? Why is it relevant? What do we get from it? It's not a storybook. And why with such elaboration? Okay, he chased them 3 days and he got there quicker, and then they made a pact, and it's a whole section. So he says, the Mesilat Yesharim, that God wanted to give us more verses in the Torah. In other words, sometimes there's a negative story that comes about, but really the opportunity that grows from that negative story is that now we have more verses of the Torah, more opportunity to connect with God's wisdom and to extrapolate incredible life lessons from it. But who did it come from? It came from a guy like Laban, a troublemaker, a tumulmacher. But we got more verses in the Torah. And this is really a phenomenal lesson as it relates to all obstacles in life, right? Joseph gives us the aspect of how to deal with finding people that have fallen through the cracks and bring them back, and how to be centered. But what Potiphar's wife educates us is that when we deal with life's obstacles, even if externally it feels very, very negative and very, very dark and very, very challenging, it's not for the sake of making your life miserable, and it's not for the sake of God or the person in your life being annoying. That's a very, very, it's a very dark way of seeing things. It's a very pessimistic way of seeing things. It's also unrealistic. God has nothing to gain from just making you miserable unless you're going to learn from it, you're going to overcome the challenge, you're going to prove that it's not insurmountable, that actually is very much doable, and you can get through life and see the brightness that comes in the darkness. But you have to persevere through the darkness, not the American Bubamais. You know what America tells you? In America, it's not just today, but today it's even more. Oh, it's too hard. Quit. Find another job. Oh, it's too hard. Quit. Find another major in college. Oh, it's too hard. Quit and move to a different state. Oh, it's too hard. Everything too hard. Boom. Goodbye. Everything has to be instant and work perfectly. It's unrealistic. That's not how life works. Life was never created to be that way. So next time you have a challenge, be like Potiphar's wife. See that there's something deeper going on here. And what that means really is to look at the challenge and recognize that God wants me to go bigger and better. And sometimes the only way to go bigger and better is if you go back a few steps to go forward a few steps. Yeah.
Oh, you did that? Well, now.
No, that's a demand for growth. But I'm saying even in our own personal inner growth, you know, I think I mentioned in one of my JLI classes that a businessman can always say, okay, I made enough money, let's retire at 42. Why don't they do that? Because not only do you have to wait in business for a challenge to come, sometimes if the challenge didn't come, that means also the incredible success that normally can follow a challenge will also not come. So it's almost like, oh my gosh, what am I missing out? Because I didn't have any major challenges. What am I missing out on in the success world? You're not going to find one successful businessman that did not have 1,000 challenges for every one success. Don't judge me for the 1,000 versus the one, whatever the numbers are. That's just part of life. Spiritually, it's that way. Raising children, it's that way. Successful marriages are that way. Anyone that tells you, oh yeah, we got married 32 years ago, and from the day we got married till today, it's been a picnic. We never argued, we never fought, we never screamed at each other. I guarantee you, if that happened, they're not in a happy marriage. They haven't spoken to each other in 32 years. That's why it's like that. If they have spoken to each other, guarantee they have disagreements, guarantee they've had arguments, guaranteed at some point one of them was nasty to the other and had to apologize, and they grew from that and became better. And so Potiphar's wife is teaching us something so fundamental about the concealment, about the obstacles that we experience in life. Margaret, Chagai and Margaret, I meant everyone's marriage besides yours. I just wanted to say that. I knew that. I just thought I'd throw that in. I was getting worried. You think I'm talking about you. But the point is, by the way, I never met anyone, Margot, married to an Israeli that had an argument. Israelis never argue about anything. The point is that when it comes to obstacles, it's a question of perception. How we see the obstacles. And if we want to see the growth, if we want to see the holiness that can come through the seemingly unholy obstacles that come in our way, then you have to persevere through that. Yosef did it, which is how he survived as a observant Jew connected to his father Jacob and his mother Rachel, and he raised his children Menashe and Ephraim in Egypt. That when Jacob met them, when he finally comes to Egypt, he meets his grandchildren for the first time. He's like, who are these kids? Meaning, how did you manage to raise them in a place like this? But he had the foundation, and he passed that balance on to them. The balance that not only do we live an anchored life with positive and refraining from negative, but we are also capable of overcoming any challenge. And Joseph lived that. How many challenges could one young lad have? 17 years old. He lost his mother when he was under 10. His brothers put him in a pit. Then they sold him. And then his wife's master, accused him of something he didn't do. He ended up in a prison cell. What a life this guy had. You know what it means to live with that? Today, he'd be a victim of 16 different organizations that are involved in victim advocacy. Every victim advocacy, Joseph would have belonged in that program. And what did he do? He carried the torch of his parents, Jacob and Rachel. He lived a balanced life spiritually. He was able to reach out to others and inspire them as well, including big chunks of the land of Egypt. And he was able to survive the darkest of exiles because Potiphar's wife taught him in the process of her false accusation that the most holy experiences in life come through obstacles that seem very, very unholy. And that really brings us to Hanukkah, because the word Hanukkah comes from it comes from two different things. From the word Chanu Chafei, which means they rested on the 25th day of Kislev, but also from the word Chinuch, which means education or rededication, because they were rededicating the temple again after it was desecrated by the Syrian Greeks. But the word in Hebrew, Chinuch, for dedication is also the same word for education. And really, what Hanukkah teaches us, which is why there's such an emphasis, not just on lighting the menorah, which we're going to do tomorrow night, but there's such a big emphasis, especially amongst Hasidic Jews, and really it should be everywhere. But somehow, when the Jews came from Europe, they got jealous of the Christians, and they started giving Hanukkah presents instead of Hanukkah geld. Hanukkah presents is not a real thing. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but you should also give geld. You give children actual cash, because then they can take 10% of that cash and give it to tzedakah. So now you're educating them about giving charity, and then they can go buy. Hopefully they buy some holy things too, not just toys and presents, but maybe they buy some sfarim like Chaya. He's going to go straight to the bookstore and buy only holy books. But my point is that it's about education and dedication. And they went through a lot, the Jewish people, during the story of Hanukkah. 3 years of war. They lost many, many people, right? They had if the UN was around, they'd be screaming at the Maccabees, that there's a lot of innocent civilians amongst the Syrian Greeks, that really you should think of a ceasefire, and really you should split the temple and make it a united place, not just for the Jews, but maybe you could put a pig on one altar and maybe the offerings on another altar, so we can make everyone happy. The whole world would be screaming cock-a-doodle-doo at the Jews, and Judah the Maccabee would never succeed. You know what Judah the Maccabee did? He remembered that when God puts an insane obstacle in front of you, you have to fight for the values, for the holiness, and for the people's future, even when and by the way, many of the people screaming at Judah the Maccabee were not the Greeks, they were the Messiavnim, they were Jews acting like Greeks. Oh, Judah the Maccabee's making trouble. Can't he just surrender? Can't he just not make so much noise? Can't he just give up on this war? It's not worth it. The world's going to hate us even more if we fight for our own lives. So let's die quietly. By the way, that's what ceasefire means right now. It means let the Jews die quietly. Sorry. We tried that option 80 years ago. It's not going to happen again. But it's also not going to happen spiritually. And that's my job, is mostly on the spiritual. And that is, when you see spiritual obstacles like the Syrian Greeks, who were mostly about spirit. They just didn't. They wanted to outlaw circumcision. Not they wanted. They outlawed circumcision. They outlawed Shabbos. They outlawed Rosh Chodesh. The idea of sanctifying the moon and having Rosh Chodesh. They outlawed some of those beautiful parts of Judaism. And Judah the Maccabee said, "Go to hell. We don't want to listen to you. We won't listen to you. We're going to fight for the values that we believe in. And the fact that you're making it hard for us and you're killing many of us, including many of Judah the Maccabee's warrior brothers and his father, we're not going to stop until we succeed." Because that is something that was ingrained in him all the way back to the tribes of Israel. And so as we learn Parshas Vayeshev, and by divine providence, it's the same week that we begin Hanukkah, it's important to remember that good things don't come easy. They come through perseverance. They come with ensuring that internally we are balanced people, right? For a change, let's pause from changing the world and try to change ourselves a little bit. And it happens when we follow in Joseph's footsteps, in which we are capable of inspiring the world around us because we have the inner balance that's needed to do so. And we recognize that the obstacles are only there for our benefit, to become better, stronger, more enthusiastic about our Yiddishkeit, and not wither away because a couple of people screamed from the river to the sea. Okay, so they screamed, pushing tachas. So l'chaim, have a freilich in Hanukkah, have an inspiring, uplifting, bright Hanukkah. If you have an extra menorah, give it to someone that needs it. And if they don't know that they need it, explain to them why they need it and then have them light it. Whatever you did last year for Hanukkah, make this year 10 times brighter. Don't let them push you into the duck and hide. We're not hiding. We're not ducking. We're not concealing. No, not even that kind of Montana, when you say not concealing, I'm not talking about your concealed permits. I'm talking about concealing your Yiddishkeit. We're not concealing our Yiddishkeit. We're not arrogant, and we're not narcissistic, and we're not in anyone's face. But we are bright. We are very bright. And like Joseph, we will succeed until the entire Egypt recognizes that we are the viceroy. We represent something different. We know how to interpret dreams figuratively. We know how to give explanations to values and meaning to life. And we have something to offer that the world gets from nowhere else. And so no matter how much you'll scream, and no matter how much the presidents of these so-called prestigious institutions, toilet bowl institutions, will say that it's okay for Jews to be the genocide of Jews, we're not Nespol. We don't get bent out of our shape. We follow Judah the Maccabee. We follow Joseph. We follow Ephraim and Manasseh. And with all the hardship, we end up on the other side stronger, brighter, invigorated. And with that, I'd like to wish all our brothers and sisters that are now serving in the IDF, that find themselves for this Hanukkah in places that no Jew should ever find themselves, under extreme danger, with terrorists trying to kill them. And we're losing soldiers every day, that Hashem should protect the men and women that are doing everything in their power to keep our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael out of harm's way, that they should all come home to their families in good health and with peace. And ultimately, we should eradicate all evil and merit this Hanukkah. Just like then they found the small jug of oil and they lit the menorah, we should find the pure oil, and we should be able to light our menorah on our holy temple. Yes, I said it right here, on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We should merit the light of the menorah. With the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, and the high priest will stand there and will merit, as we say in Valanissim, that they came into the holy temple and they cleared it up and they were able to ignite the Temple Mount with the beautiful lights of the menorah. A freilich in Chanukah, be inspired, be uplifted, be bright, and we'll see you back here, God willing, next Wednesday. Sei gesund.
Thank you.